we're excited to be back with you on the Catch 'em Keep 'em podcast today. And we want to talk with you a little bit about how not only to survive through a down economy, but how to thrive, because we know that what goes down will come back up. So we want to talk about, first of all, how you can go about cutting expenses without sacrificing service delivery to your customers, and also how to avoid the pitfalls that can be involved with that. And then finally, we'll kind of tie back around with the importance of continuing to invest in training right now. So Mark, good to see you again. Thanks so much for taking the time out to talk about this.
Hey, Melissa, great to be back. And, things have been going well. I feel like, we have to kind of take things a day at a time, week to week. And felt like it was a pretty good week last week. I felt productive, got some good quality family time, and it was a good work balance week, I think. How about yourself?
And the same. And, it's been a little bit challenging for me to balance, because I was kind of getting into this mode of just kind of a little bit of family things. And then all of a sudden this big project was dumped on. And I say that in the most loving and grateful manner. This big project for work came along, and I was like, wait, what? I have to work along someone else's deadlines and expectations? Okay, I got to figure out how to do this again. So grateful to have, both kind of clicking along.
Well, that's, Melissa, that's the interesting thing to me about work-life balance is I think sometimes we associate work-life balance with like a permanent state of balance. But sometimes I think work-life balance means when you have big work projects, you might have to focus predominantly on work and not as much on life for a week or 2 weeks at a time. But then there are times when you go on vacation and take time off where you pretty much don't focus on work. So I think we all have to remember work-life balance is not like a specific automatic societal template you have to follow. It's just an overall state of balance.
It is. It's a cumulative thing. And I think that you're so right. We get caught in this trap of, every day there has to be this invested here and that invested
right
here. And that just doesn't work, So really good point there. Really good point.
So what's on our agenda today, Melissa?
So, well, I can't wait to get to the accountability part, but I know that that's for the end. So I'm holding my horses there. But, first to start off with the cutting expenses without jeopardizing service delivery. I honestly, Mark, last time, you and I debriefed when we did our first episode, and I was really trying to give a lot of kind of heartfelt thought to what value I in my business, and obviously yourself and your business, what are we bringing to companies right now? Because I feel for me personally, it's different than what I've classified it as. I'm trying to keep a pulse on, what I can do to help right now, because everything is just so different than it was a month ago. So that's why I thought, I'd really like to talk about how to continue to stay focused on the future, but taking the immediate actions that we need to, as in some cases like yourself and myself, small businesses, medium-sized businesses. And that includes cutting expenses. And a big part of that, the number one, I'm sure you can attest to, is employees. We're laying off. And so how do we keep getting the work done and making sure that the service delivery we do have the opportunity to give to our customers doesn't suffer?
Yeah, I think, it's interesting, Melissa, one of the big awarenesses I had in this last week was, we're seeing so much content online, whether it's blogs or webinars or things like that, around how not to go crazy, how to overcome the disappointment and frustration. And I think we're forgetting that there's a lot of people out there who are doing fine. And a lot of people out there who are looking to kind of keep their momentum and progress us forward. So, it's got me thinking about finding that fine line between catering and certainly feeling empathetic to the people who need the help and support, because I know you and I, that's a huge priority and value for us. And at the same time, really supporting the people and organizations who are still looking to grow and add staff, who are still looking to go, whether they're an essential business or not an essential business, they just happen to be in a place where they can grow their business, whether it's by adding staff, whether it's by putting initiatives in order that they haven't been able to prioritize. So I'm so with you. And I think that, the whole thing about cutting employees, it's interesting. I think depending on the size of your business, if you're listening to this podcast is, I think most entrepreneurs will admit when they really take a hard look in the mirror at what their expenditures are and where they need to cut, especially in times of crisis, they'll tell you that they find out there's a lot of things that they're doing that they probably should have cut even before in a proactive way in a crisis. So, I mean, are you seeing that, Melissa?
Yeah, I am, and I mean, again, not to hound on my personal experience, but I, in looking at my situation, saw the same, software licenses that we had. That,
Yes.
5 extra seconds, and we can live without that. So just as a short example, I absolutely, and I think that it also is an opportunity to step back and look at the things that you're doing and evaluating, are they really valuable in returning something to the business? So from the things that you want to invest in and the things that you might just be investing your time in doing, I think it's a great opportunity to look at that whole landscape and really narrow and hone in on the points where you can make the greatest impact.
Yeah, Melissa, on a leadership level, one thing I've discovered is that there are responsibilities that I typically rely on either interns or lower waged employees to do, responsibilities that I've never really had the interest or desire to learn how. And what's interesting is I think we're all effective leaders when we understand the roles and the responsibilities that our team plays. So it's given me a different perspective to understand how long these things take, how to actually do them. Are there more efficient ways to do them? And like you said, do we even need to be doing them? So that's been great.
Yeah. And I think another thing too, that one area of our business that I see expanding that I think is going to be really beneficial for a lot of our customers is the virtual support and project work, statement of work business models. Because it's something that we could always do, but it wasn't something that a lot of our customers were they weren't asking for it. And I think it was just a matter of inertia. They were used to having a person physically show up at their workplace, and they would train them and set them up on the systems. But in fact, we have the ability to be handling a lot of that onboarding aspect and taking a lot of the strain of remote onboarding away from them. And bringing them a finished product for a fixed price, as opposed to, this trying to navigate this world of, I hope I can find, vet, and then onboard and train someone to do this work that I need to have done. So that's an area where we're really able to step up and hold customers' hands through that whole process. So I think that that's one area that's really where, in my industry, I think that that's really shifting, and a lot of people are going to be better for it because it's a much more efficient way to do things in a lot of cases.
Well, so when you think of onboarding, I think you're really making a good point. When you think of onboarding, are there a few elements? I mean, yes, it's going to be virtual now, but when I speak with companies, I don't see a consistent and engaging onboarding process. It feels like so many onboarding programs are around policies and procedures and things like that, as opposed to really engaging content. So what are you seeing, and what is Franklin Professionals doing to really address improving those onboarding programs, virtually or not?
Yeah, and I think virtually is, yes, virtually or not, but I think especially right now, a lot of companies are starting to get it, and like you said, they've got this quote unquote onboarding program, and so it's great they've got this concept. But you're so right, a lot of it goes straight to policies and procedures, and it kind of skips over the whole DNA of the company and what makes it tick in a way that other companies don't tick. What makes them essentially special, and thus a fit for the quote unquote special people, that match is what I'm referring to there. So I think communication is the number one thing here. And it's two things. It's one, understanding what to be communicating, because that's missed. I mean, and that's like your starting point. And then understanding how to communicate it. I think that there's lots of platforms where we have very rich communication available to us, but for example, case in point, video, rather than putting out printed text or images, infographic stuff in your onboarding, I really think that we need to be incorporating a lot more face-to-face interaction. So thinking about what we're trying to communicate and then thinking about how we can most effectively communicate these things and in multiple fashions.
Yeah, I got to share a little resource, Melissa. So, we're both based in Massachusetts, of course, and there's a loan out there now for small businesses called the PPA loan, and it's something that I've just started the application process. And for our listeners, I'm not 100% sure of this, but this is a really critical aspect of it I'm looking into that would really be important, Melissa, to you and your clients and prospects. And that is the essential, are you familiar with this loan at all, Melissa?
I am, I shouldn't say familiar, I'm aware of it.
Okay. So I'm just starting to become more aware of it. But the long and short of it is this. Basically, the loan incentivizes you to not lay off people, right? So they basically will pay you, will cover your payroll. And if you can prove to them that you are allocating 75% of the loan to payroll, you'll get reimbursed for it. It's pretty fabulous. And the element I'm checking into is what about hiring people? What about not just not laying off people, but what about adding and rehiring so to keep unemployment rates lower? And so, I will find that out and certainly pass that along in our next podcast. But I will tell you, that could be huge because, Melissa, I could see demand for your services ramping up big time if companies know the state will reimburse for those hires. I mean, I'm going to be first in line. I got to tell you, I might even knock some people over to be first in line. Just saying.
Well, yeah, I mean, and rightly so. I mean, this is the opportunity then to really focus on building, right?
Right.
Bringing people in, getting these training, onboarding programs really up and running, and perfect time to be testing things out when you don't have the same level of pressure from your customers. You have a little leeway to do this now. It's prime time.
Yeah, and one other point, Melissa, I think your point about onboarding is very important too, because I know one of the things that I've started to look at is my processes, my standard operating procedures, my training methods, because I'm talking about internally. Because I think as a company, it's a good time to really reevaluate how you are onboarding as you do anticipate the growth and plan on the upcoming hiring when this levels out a little bit. So I think really understanding what works and doesn't work while you're evaluating what cuts to make in your company it's a great opportunity for that.
I agree, Mark. And there's something else I would add on to that. In my point earlier about, if you are in a position where you're trying to do more with less people right now, and a company would potentially look towards contingent staffing just to help them buffer workloads as the workloads come in. The advantage is that they can just pay for the skills they need when they need them, and then not be on the hook for unemployment and insurance costs and things of that sort. But to your point, it's also a great opportunity to test run your training and make tweaks along the way, because you're bringing in, let's call them quote unquote test subjects. And I think we've talked about this before together with SOP creation or even SOP modification. When you have someone new to the team, having them review and test run the
right.
SOP, make sure that it actually works, and wherever it breaks down, make those adjustments.
Yeah, Melissa, I also want to add that my oldest son works for Best Buy in Florida. And he told me recently that even though Best Buy is shut down, I mean, they're still available online, but they've shut down in their in-person stores. They've actually they're bringing everybody back. They're keeping everybody on payroll, but just having them do kind of mundane responsibilities at the store. At the end of the day, the bottom line is people still get a paycheck, which is what counts. So kudos to Best Buy. But the reason I bring it up is because I think we all forget as companies. I know as an entrepreneur and as a business owner, our to-do lists are never ending, right? No matter what's going on, we could always find 100 things to do to improve our business, improve, our culture. My point is that as you're evaluating what to do with your existing team, what to do as far as bringing on new team members, think about the additional responsibilities that they could be doing so they don't have to be laid off. Because I think that's a big part of this is being innovative, being clever, finding out other things they can be doing that you wouldn't normally have them do, but if it keeps them getting a paycheck, I think it's really important to be evaluating that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a win-win. It's an opportunity for both sides. I think that's a really good point. So Mark, one thing I was curious about as far as training goes, because I feel like, I was thinking about the typical response to hiring salespeople in a down economy, or the way companies treat salespeople when the economy starts to show that it's, trending downward, is they lay salespeople off, or they stop hiring salespeople. And to me, it's just, I get it, but it seems a little counterintuitive. It seems like, wouldn't that be the time to be investing in salespeople? I'm just curious, is that what you see with training? Do you see companies kind of pull back on their investment of training dollars and say, we'll wait till things are back to normal and before we go forward with more training? Or what do you see?
Well, I mean, the first thing I want to say in response to that is, and I'm not embellishing when I say this, the thing that is keeping me up nights, literally every night now, is, we're used to using words like employee engagement. Mm-hmm. If you have ever participated in a virtual meeting or a virtual training or some kind of virtual interaction, if it is not a one-on-one situation, I want you to think for a second as a listener to our podcast, what you do to stay focused while listening. Because I got to be honest, Melissa, I think people are kidding themselves. We live in such an attention deficit society that when you're in a virtual situation, do you have your phone in front of you? Do you have your email up in the background? Do you have the door closed? Because I got to be honest, that's the biggest problem I see. Training, meetings, whatever, is that I don't think people are going to be engaged. And I do a lot of work on listening and having people be more effective listeners. And if you aren't present and you aren't mindful for those meetings or trainings, it's a waste. Mm-hmm. And I think that yes, I see a lot of companies pulling back, less so now. I see it starting to even out a bit, but in the first month or so, let's be honest, companies are scrambling to keep their employees. The last thing they're worried about is training. Mm-hmm. With that said, this is the fundamental problem with wellness and why so many companies have been so slow to adopt wellness. When you say you're worried about your employees, when a leadership team or an executive says that, what does that actually mean? Well, we know it means don't lose your job, but how about their mental and emotional health during these times? And I think that's the thing about training. The message companies should be getting is not to not do training. It should be to shift the priorities of training to concepts like resiliency, emotional intelligence, and mental health. And I'll tell you, Melissa, I've been very heartened to see, I have 3 webinars coming up this month, and I'm usually kind of skeptical about webinars because, again, I don't think people focus or whatever, but I have a lot of signups, way more than I anticipated, and I'm very pleasantly surprised. So I'm hoping that to your question, I'm hoping that's a trend to training becoming more of a priority, but I am seeing what you're saying, but I am seeing it start to even out a bit.
That's great. That's great. And I think too, I don't know how long this is going to go on. I think, we had a sense that it would be a couple months or maybe now a few months, but from what I'm seeing, there's a lot of ambiguity about, the timeline here. So I'm glad to hear that you're seeing people take more of an interest in this because, at some point, the current ways that we've been communicating and interacting with one another when we do have opportunities to be in the same building, in the same room, if this continues to go on and we don't adapt, and in some cases, some companies are going to have to do a lot of adaptation very quickly, then I think it poses a real threat to their business.
Yeah, and Melissa, let me add one other thought. You mentioned about salespeople, and here's the thing I see with salespeople. What's very concerning to me about laying off salespeople or even keeping salespeople is that salespeople have enough trouble as it is maintaining their habits.
Mhm.
So now we're in a situation where they can't do their traditional prospecting and calling and so on and so forth. And there's a lot of companies I'm working with right now who I see the salespeople doing nothing. And I got to tell you, I could give an organization a list of 10 productive, meaningful, important things that salespeople could be doing in downtime. And I'm not talking about adding notes to a CRM. I'm talking about making sure your pipeline is qualified and updated. I'm talking about things like reaching out to your network and doing more channel partner building and networking. There's a lot of things, but I think a lot of companies, organizations are freezing up. And not only are they quick to lay people off, but they're missing golden opportunities to do these things and to develop habits in the interim that hopefully carry over when things return back to normal.
Yeah, yeah, that's a really good point. That's a really good point. I know I'm seeing, I saw a lot of our customers pulling back on placements that were already on the books, the scheduled to start and such, and they pushed out, first 2 weeks and then a month, and now they're questioning if they're even going to hire or if they're going to end up shrinking the size of the organization. So, I think if it's a mindset thing though, and if people can just stay open-minded to these, what you're referring to, I think that they have to continue to realize there's another side to this. We're going to get through it and go on. So, continuing to do things that invest in the future, I think is something that we still need to keep thinking about.
Yeah, and let me ask you an important question, Melissa, because there's one thing, and I'm not just saying this because you're my partner in crime here. I'm saying this because I really believe it. The word recruiting is an interesting word because, as a matter of fact, my 13-year-old asked me, he heard the term headhunter on TV the other day. And he was asking me about a headhunter. And you'll have to tell me if I explain this right. But the way I explained headhunter was it's more of a high level, more of an executive level of recruiting. So first, before I go any further, is that accurate? Would you say that's okay?
I think so, yeah.
And so, but as I said it, right after I said it, I said to myself, boy, but that really devalues what a recruiter does. And what I wanted to ask you about is this. What are some stigma and perception now more than ever in this crisis around, because I know a lot of your customers and I've heard from their mouths the value that Franklin Professionals does. It's way more than recruiting. It's consulting, it's engagement, it's retention. So what are some misconceptions and myths perhaps about bucketing you and labeling you as a recruiter that people are missing out on?
Oh, it's interesting. When I go into a room of, networking, the headhunters, I've had people actually apologize to me when they're trying to figure out what I do. They're like, so are you headhunter? And like it's a dirty word, like, used car salesman. And you're right. In a lot of cases, I think it does get that negative rep. And the reason for it is I think that, in some cases, people have experienced what we refer to in the industry as recruiters who operate in such a way where they're just slamming people into the job, saying whatever they have to say, just getting the offer, getting it accepted, and their work is done. So that I think perception in those cases is that people see that the recruiter is just concerned about their paycheck and not about the person and the long-term relationship and fit, the retention of the employee with the client. Unfortunately, it takes like one bad experience to kind of spoil it for everybody. So by and large, I think that the industry has some mostly phenomenal players, people who really do care. I know many that I've met through my career in the last 20 years who, I would work alongside in a heartbeat. But, it's like people go and review something when they have had a negative experience more often than they would go on to review a positive experience. And I think that's a little bit of what's happened there.
Melissa, do you worry at all about, when we talk about company culture, there's two concerns I have, and I'm wondering what your feedback would be on this. One of them is, it always comes down to when the what hits the fan, how do people react, right? So if a lot of companies are reacting by laying off people, there's two questions, right? How do you see it affecting company culture first? when people are laying off people, especially if the perception at that company is there could be other alternatives. And secondly, if the demands get so, as you were alluding to earlier in our podcast, if the demands on the remaining people get so high and unreasonable, and then their engagement level or enjoyment level of the job get affected, when you hear those elements, do you have concerns that company culture could really be affected in certain situations coming out of this?
You know, in some cases, I've considered companies are in a little bit of a no-win situation. I think what you're referring to there. You know, I've been talking with people who are upset that their company hasn't laid them off. They've laid other people off, and those people get to be home, and they're getting, you know, funds from stimulus package and this and that, and they still are being exposed every day. And, you know. And then, in fact, case in point, someone very recently who was saying that got laid off. And now it's, well, what am I going to do? I'm not making as much money as I was. You know, you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. You know, and I think it's a lot of the manifestation of people's uncertainty and fear, and you know, they're going to find a way to discharge that somewhere. So, you know, as a business, it's so difficult, and when you're in a way responsible for someone's livelihood, the first person that they're going to direct frustration at is the one that's paying them. So I think we need to be braced for that. And the thing that I think is the most important to pull us through, I hope that companies have established a culture, and if they don't feel that they have, that they really focus on establishing a culture where they're genuinely caring about their employees, and they're showing that they genuinely care about employees as individuals, and you know, kind of make sure people don't just feel like a number, because fundamentally, whatever hard decisions and actions you have to take as a business, if people know that, you know, you care about them and their best interest is in your heart, and you know, sometimes things just happen in such a way where you're out of choices. I think that it's a pill that's a lot easier to swallow when someone has to face something difficult with you when it's coming from that vantage point, you know.
Makes sense. Yeah, just interesting how things, well, you really can't win, can you, Melissa?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's why it comes back to that fundamental relationship that employers have with their employees. If it's one of caring and, you know, goodwill, then you can get through a lot of the tough stuff. If it's not based in that, then no matter what you do, it's never good enough.
Yeah, and I think, you know, Melissa, you alluded earlier about training, and I think the big message I would like to give our listeners is the key word here is support, right? We all need support in different ways. That support could be training, that support could be coaching, that support could have nothing to do with training and coaching, right? But at the end of the day, I think there's an assumption we all make of what others need for support instead of asking. So I think that one of the best things we can do as organizations and leaders is ask people for what they need, because the answer is going to be different depending on who you're asking. And so I think training and coaching is a certainly valuable bucket area that can lend support, but I think there's more, and I think we have to start asking.
Oh my God, yeah, 100% agreed on that. I second that wholeheartedly.
Yeah.
So I think that we're at a good stopping point, Mark. Should we go into the accountability?
Yes.
I don't want to rush things here, but you know,
Yes.
I'm talking about accountability.
Yes.
All right. So how'd you do?
So here's the thing, Melissa. I've been so excited for this podcast to share this because it reinforced for me something I've always believed. I did get it done. My taxes are off to my accountant. It literally took me to do, as I anticipated, about a half an hour to get what I needed done.
That's great.
But here's the thought process that came out of it for me, Melissa, is that I realized part of the reason I got it done was because I was accountable, because I did not want to come on this podcast today and say I didn't do it. And I'm not joking. And I think that It's so weird, Melissa, because so much of motivation and mindset and habit change has to do with tricking ourselves. And what's weird, I think, for people is we would never want to be known as manipulators or people that trick others.
Mhm.
But unfortunately, when it comes to yourself, you do kind of have to trick yourself sometimes into getting things done. And
Mhm.
it's such foreign territory for people to even embrace the concept that it's hard for adoption to take place. But I will tell you, I felt like last week I got more done in the last week, like difficult stuff I've been putting off than I have in several weeks, even pre-corona. And I really believe part of it was because you and I talked about it and I didn't want to have to face the music and not doing it. So great news. What about you?
Yeah, good job, Mark. That's great.
Thank you.
So before I answer the question, I just have to share with you what I discovered.
Okay.
And so the answer to my question is that it depends on how you define exercise. Because mine was 30 minutes of exercise every single day. Well, that was last time we talked, it was a Tuesday. So that Wednesday morning, I woke up and I was inspired to do this 3-week long cleanse that I had promised myself I would do once a year. And I bought the whole kit. It's like $300. I bought it 3 years ago and it was still sitting in my cabinet.
Wow.
So I woke up and I was like, okay, this is it. So I started it. The first week is so bad. You know, it's like 21 pills a day and you're not feeling good because of what they're doing to you. So, but I did that and it was just this catalyst. It kind of created a domino effect. So the point here, what I'm getting to is that my exercise, as I would normally define it, was not existent in the way that I was envisioning last time we talked. But I did do other things that I was classifying as exercise, considering what I was doing was not conducive to hardcore training.
Yep.
So yoga, some projects that involved running up and down 4 flights of stairs 20, 25 times a day. You know, kind of incorporating, just thinking about exercise in terms of movement and not being so narrow-minded about, oh, you know, I didn't go down into my gym and you know, do the same movements that I do every day. So, failed again. So I think keeping a broad perspective.
So I have to tell you, I think that's so valuable. And I want to add one more thought because you've motivated me to say it. And that is, so a lot of people who know me really well know that I'm from the Brene Brown school of being vulnerable. And so a lot of people who know me, a lot of people I've trained know that I see a counselor, I see a therapist because it adds a lot of value to what I do.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I spend so much time helping other people that it's good to have someone as a sounding board. And I got to tell you, Melissa, building on what you said, and this is a very quick exchange, but I had to share it. So I really hate the traditional definition of exercise. Like I hate it. It really sounds boring. I don't enjoy it. And I've been telling myself that my whole adult life. And so I said to my therapist the other day in a session, I said, you know, I really wish I could get back into exercise. And she goes, well, do you like it? I go, no, I don't like it at all. And she goes, well, why do you want to do it? And I said, because I want to lose weight and I want to be back to feel more energetic and physically fit. And she said to me, just like this, Melissa, she said, so let me just get this straight. You hate exercise and you've actually told yourself the only reason you're doing it is because you have to, which breeds resentment. So that's never going to get it done. And so the moral to this story is, she said to me, she goes, Mark, think about when you have successfully exercised in the past, how you felt. And so she said, it's as simple as telling yourself, oh, I have to go exercise, as opposed to, I can't wait to go exercise because I know how great I'm going to feel afterwards.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so what you're talking about, Melissa, about reframing it and repositioning to it, how you were looking at it. And it breaks my heart. It seems so simple. And I just wish in the same way people were cruel to themselves and how they talk to themselves and their inner voice, they would be nice to themselves and reframe information and know that it's not tricking, it's just a mindset thing. So anyway, I just wanted to share that story because it totally resonated with me in the situation I just had with my counselor.
That is so great. I mean, isn't it awesome to have someone who's able to bounce things back on you
Yes.
and make you realize how, we all tend to carry these really ridiculous thought patterns.
Right.
When they're framed for you in the right way.
Yes. Yes. All right. So what are we doing this week, Melissa? We got to hold ourselves accountable. What's our big bucket list item for this week?
Oh my gosh. I actually, okay. So this is a little bit of a spoiler alert. I'll go first for this. I have decided that I want to officially launch virtual assistant services within our service offerings.
Wow.
And because I can do it, I built my business using virtual assistants, and so I have a lot of understanding of how to do it successfully. And we've done it for customers, and I thought, I don't advertise that we can do this, so why am I not doing that? So I think I need to bite the bullet and get that done.
So what do you need? Pick one thing. So this is important, right? Pick one thing so it doesn't feel so huge. What's an incremental thing you want to do to get started?
So I want to get this on our website because a lot of the tools that we would employ, I already have because I was using them for ourselves. So getting this up on the website so people can see that it is something that we could do for them, I would be so thrilled if we can do that in the next 2 weeks.
Awesome. All right. Well, mine is I'm going to have a specific newsletter, a sales only newsletter for the sales companies I help in sales, and a leadership only newsletter that I'm developing. And by the time our next podcast, not only do I want those newsletters to be completed, I want the first edition of each to have been sent out.
Awesome.
So that's what I'm shooting for.
All right. So, and just a reminder to our listeners, we would love if you guys would join us in the accountability ring, so we can keep you on pace and on track too. I feel like the more energy we can put in, the more momentum we can all build. So I'm just putting that out there as well.
Yeah, and let me just add that, for Melissa and I think I can speak for Melissa in saying that, look, we both have our core values, and our passion for doing what we do is really to help human beings feel more confident, feel more successful, so on and so forth. And I think for anybody listening to the podcast, if you want to reach out to Melissa or myself just to pick our brain, vent, run something by us, a challenge you're having, please do. We wouldn't charge you. We genuinely would be happy to help. And I just want to throw that out there.
Yeah, absolutely. Always happy to help. Just in closing, I think that the more I attempt to help other people, and the more I'm sharing the lessons I've learned along the way, I feel like I learn twice as much than what I give in those interactions. So I would always welcome a phone call and help in any way, certainly at no charge. So thanks for mentioning that, Mark.
Yeah, agreed. And by the way, if you're looking for a good laugh, I recently watched the old TV movie Airplane for about the 25th time. So if you just need a laugh and some absolute silly comedy, I recommend it.
All right, got it on the list.
Yep. So, all right, thanks, Melissa.
Thanks, Mark. Take good care.
All right, we'll see you next time.
Okay, bye-bye.